Hi, friends. This is Kevin Burke of Rachel's Vineyard. Welcome to Oceans of Mercy. My guest today is a man with a checkered past. After participating in the abortion of his preborn child in 1976 in Houston, Texas, he began a life of pain and denial, descending into alcohol and drug abuse, sexual addiction, and apostasy. Now, flash forward years later, this same man is pioneering a new outreach to men in the Catholic Church and leading other men who have experienced abortion loss to reconciliation and healing. How did this man go from abortion, sexual addiction, and as he describes, apostasy, to being an instrument of God's mercy and healing? I'm really blessed this day to welcome Reg Platt to Oceans of Mercy.
Hello, Kevin. Thank you
Hi,
for
Reg.
having me.
It's great. I'm so glad you could be with me today.
It's an honor and a privilege.
Reg, you know, there's a lot of men like yourself in the 70s and 80s who have experienced abortion, and I know some of them are going to be watching us today. Some of the folks watching this today will have loved ones, a spouse, a brother, a sister, a friend, a colleague, somebody at their church. They have a sense, you know, at some time in their life has experienced, been part of an abortion decision. So I'm hoping that they can listen to your story and learn more about what you have to offer in your ministry. So let's go back in the time machine, Reg, and let's go back to that. We can go back as far as you like, but I definitely want to go back to that time in the 70s when you were facing an unplanned pregnancy, and share with our viewers what that experience was like for you.
Well, actually, the first thing is that it was an unexpected pregnancy, but it was not a situation where we were just a couple of careless lovers or somebody whose contraception failed. It was actually my first wife. She and I conceived a child who was an uninvited guest to our wedding. See, I had married my first wife, thinking that she, in fact, was sterile. She had had an abortion previously when she was 16, barely able to drive in Texas, and when abortion was still illegal here. And she thought that the saline procedure had sterilized her. And so we went into this. I married her anyway because I loved her. And then when we found out quite unexpectedly that she was pregnant, I was delighted. It was, I considered it a blessing. But there were some other things that caused a bit of a problem. You see, we were in theater back then, and she had just been cast in a role that required her to portray a dancing Indian princess maiden. And you can't be a dancing Indian princess maiden if you're 4 months pregnant. Mm-hmm. So we had a talk, which essentially meant she took me aside and said, "I'm having this abortion, but don't worry, we'll have another one."
So she was saying, you know, we're going to be able to have another child. So
this one doesn't matter. Yeah.
What was your first reaction when she suggested, well, she told you this was going to be the course of action? What was your feelings at that time?
Well, it broke my heart is what it did. It broke my heart in two. But I didn't say anything. I was in a position where I really couldn't. All my friends were young, late teen, early 20 liberals who believed that abortion was a hard fought and won right for women. And so instead of what I felt inside, which was, please don't do this, I said, okay, darling, whatever you want, it's your body. I will support your decision, which I now know meant, okay, this is not really my problem then. So I was a coward and I let it go, and I did not raise a finger to help my child. And even if it had been unsuccessful, at least if I'd raised a finger, if I'd said something, I'd have a clear conscience, but I didn't.
Do you think how do you think she might have responded if you did respond yourself to respond differently and voice opposition and advocate for the child, et cetera? You know, what do you think her response might have been?
I don't believe it would have been much different, frankly. She was a liberated woman, and so she knew it was her right. She'd already had an abortion in her past,
Yeah.
and and now this one would be legal. So she was going to do it because her career meant more to her at that point than having a child and raising a family. She wasn't willing to sacrifice that role
Yeah.
for to have a baby.
How do you think that her previous abortion fit into this situation? Any thoughts on that, Reg?
Well, I'm certain that it enforced or reinforced her decision to abort this child.
Because she never obviously dealt with that first abortion, right? In any way.
Not that I could tell. I mean, she told me about it, but she didn't show any remorse for it because, as I say, she was 16, and I'm sure she thought it would have ruined her life instead of blessing it.
Yeah.
And that, I'm sure, as I say, reinforced her decision to abort this child.
Okay.
So I actually fit into two categories of men at this point. A man who's married a woman with an abortion in her past,
Mm-hmm.
and a man whose child was being aborted. And it made me very depressed and angry. I was
Did those feelings hit you right away? Or was it something that kind of like in the initial, did you go with her to the procedure?
Oh, yes. Yes, I took her to the procedure.
What was that like being at the center when that was happening?
It was like being in a desert. I sat in the waiting room and just wishing to be anywhere but there at that moment with
Sure.
what was going on in the next room. And but I was in a pretty strong denial myself. I was thinking in my head that this is an okay thing. This is fine. This is, the courts have already dealt with this years ago, 3 years ago. And it was, after all, her choice and not mine. And so I just kind of pushed it all down. But you can fool the head, but you can't fool the heart.
It's
Yeah,
a good way of putting it. Yeah.
my heart, as I say, was broken. And it was starting already to crust up into a stone heart.
Mm.
And
You know what? I've heard a couple other men say that. I think that's a really interesting way to talk about it, how uh, the heart becomes hard. And
yes,
I'm curious of how you saw that hardness kind of manifests itself, and if you would mind sharing a little about that.
you barely notice it, truth be told.
Okay.
Now, during that summer, while she was doing the show, I actually got a part in the show as well. And I felt suicidal, to tell you the truth.
Mm.
One night, I was even drugged out of my head, and I was ready to cut my wrists open. Had the hot water running in the sink in our little cabin, and had the blade poised over my wrist.
Wow.
And as I looked in the mirror, the first thoughts were, I hate you. How could you? You're just an evil person.
Mm.
And but then I made eye contact with myself, and what happened was I saw Jesus looking back at me through my eyes,
Mm.
and I couldn't go through with it.
Wow,
And
it's
I was
powerful.
come with a sense that God wasn't done with me.
Mm,
He had plans for me at this point. And
mm.
so I didn't follow through. Maybe I just chickened out and rationalized it,
No, 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 you didn't no, you didn't
but
chicken
I
out.
believe,
That was a moment of
yeah,
grace, Reg.
yes. Well, I believe it was a moment of grace, and that God had specific plans for me and told me just not yet.
Reg, that's such a
Well, the summer
powerful
went.
that's such a powerful pivotal moment, and it reveals, I think, on so many different levels, emotionally, but spiritually, it's powerful because you know, the agenda of evil is multifaceted, as we know.
Oh
In
yeah,
addition, as is God's plans for us, but you could see clearly that evil in that situation wants to take that hurt and grief and pain that we're not able to process, and it wants to take that expression of that grief and pain, which oftentimes is anger, and then it wants to turn it on us as the accuser. And I really felt that as you were describing that scene where the evil wants to then take that further and not only destroy the child and the relationship, but wants to destroy you as the father of the child. And it's beautiful to hear how, now when you said you looked in the mirror and you said you saw evil, were you talking about the abortion itself at that point? Was that what do you think was really propelling you at that point to want to hurt yourself? Was the abortion pain?
I'm sure that it was, but I wasn't consciously aware of it at the time.
Okay.
I was really in serious, serious denial. I knew I was angry. I knew I was depressed. I knew I was upset and on a hair trigger for everything. But not once did I stop and think, well, this is because of the abortion.
That's really helpful for our viewers because I think that's a very, wouldn't you say that's a very common experience for men is oftentimes there's not a connection between whatever's happening in the symptoms, the powerful feelings, emotions, whatever, the drug abuse, and the connection to the abortion. There's such a capacity. Maybe this is part of our gift as men, as we can sometimes put down stuff and deal with it later. But in this context, that has a high price, wouldn't you say, Reg?
Yes, indeed. The disconnect is real in so many men that I've come across who have had the abortion. I just thought I was going crazy
And that's
because
so
because
painful
I
too.
yeah, because I could not rationally figure out why this was happening. My heart
Mm.
was crying. My heart was crusting over, and it was pretty awful. And
Yeah.
one of the ironies
Mm.
of the abortion is that I had done it because I knew if I'd argued with my wife about it, that she'd have just as soon left me as do what I told her to do concerning an abortion,
Yeah.
unless it was, of course, go ahead. And the irony is that 6 months after the abortion, after we were married, after we had done this show together and been newlyweds on and off blissful, that our relationship came apart like a like a hurricane had hit it. It just
Mm.
blew into pieces. And she started stepping out with other men. She got back with the crowd she was with before we got married. Uh, she'd worked in a strip club prior to that. She had a history of sexual looseness, but she allegedly gave up for me. But she went right back into it, and I just sank lower and lower into depression. Lost my jobs, couldn't hold a job for more than 3 months. Uh, Lost our apartment. Finally threw her out of the apartment, and she came home the next morning from being out, and it was quite dreadful.
Mm.
I lost the apartment. I stayed there. I had some friends come in who took over the rent, and they let me stay there for a while. But even they could only take so much, moping around and
Mhm.
snapping and unpleasantness, which was pretty much all I was generating at that time. So
which again, Reg, again for our viewers, that's often a symptom for men of their grief and pain. It comes out in terms of anger.
mhm,
You know, you mentioned the
yes, yeah,
Oftentimes, that's how we as men will express those very vulnerable, painful emotions is through the emotion of anger. But of course, that can lead to a lot of problems in our relationships, in our work life, etc.
well, anger is apparently the only socially acceptable emotion that a man can express, at least among, real men.
Yeah.
And I
So how do you?
actually,
Go ahead, Reg. I'm sorry.
no, I actually was living homeless on the streets of Houston for a
Wow.
while after that. And
Mm.
I just finally I gave up on Houston and I moved to Dallas, where I had a friend who had just moved there himself. And on my way to Dallas, I stayed at well, they called it a monastery, but it was really make believe. These guys were pretending to be monks. Most of them were gay, although I didn't know that at the time. I stayed there a few months and then went on to Dallas. It was a Christ of the Hills monastery, and the so-called abbot of it was a fraud. I've come to find out since I left there, he'd gotten into all kinds of things, faking uh, oil tears on a icon of the Madonna,
Wow.
falsely claimed to be a priest. It was just, I had
So
no idea what I was tying myself in with there.
I'm sure it further added to your experience of disillusionment and confusion. Were you still abusing drugs at that time, or
Oh
and
yes.
alcohol? Yeah.
Oh yeah. And I will admit that I was a drug user before the abortion, but afterwards it turned into my medicine. I was doing everything I could to numb the pain I was feeling. And because when you're hurt, you'll do anything to be numb. But then
Right.
once you're numb, you'll do anything to feel something.
Wow. That's a very painful and destructive cycle, isn't it? That you just
Yes.
mentioned there. Yeah.
Yes. I tell you, I'm a lucky man. I probably should have been dead 3 or 4 times over, but
Mm.
uh, my my guardian angel works overtime.
Yeah.
In
He
fact,
must
I'm pretty sure my guardian angel drinks because of me.
have.
But I
Yeah.
got up to Dallas, and I met the woman who would become my second wife, and she was older than me by about 8 years. So there I was, 22. She had just turned 30, and we got married. And I'm pretty sure she wanted children. But it turns out at that time, my sperm count was very, very low. You do enough drugs and it will affect your reproductive system.
Okay.
And I wasn't able to impregnate her. At the time, I didn't even think that, oh, maybe this is God punishing me for the abortion, because I wasn't even thinking about the abortion at this time. It was so far back in my head that it was like it had never happened, except for the pain in my chest,
Mhm.
in my heart. And because I couldn't give her children, she started sleeping around,
Mhm.
with no emotional attachments to the people she was going to, just looking to have sex, I guess, in the hope of getting pregnant. And then she would
Yeah.
just, and she wasn't even trying to hide it, was the thing. But
Yeah.
I determined. Go ahead.
Yeah. Uh, I'm going to ask that we go into how you transitioned from really being in this very dark place and getting to the point where you're involved in Project Joseph. I want to leave us some time so we can talk about Project Joseph and
Oh,
your role in
sure,
that.
sure,
So,
sure.
so you're in
Well,
your second marriage. You're still abusing drugs and alcohol. How did you make that transition? And you're so split off from the abortion. I'm really curious and interested in how did you make that connection to all this pain and wreckage in your life and the abortion loss?
Well, after several years of my second marriage being just pretty much unhappy and barely tolerated by both of us, we split up, and I did go to therapy, and I talked about this disconnect and this craziness I felt with my therapist. And I mentioned for the first time in ages that I'd had an abortion. And I do call it my abortion because the point of an abortion is to take a child out of your life, and the child was taken out of my life. So hence my abortion.
Gotcha.
But I told him about it, and he went, no, that's probably not it. So, the wonders of modern psychology.
Yeah.
But then I did start to get myself a little more under control, taking better care of myself. I was still doing drugs and drinking, but not to the extent of trying to blot everything out. And one day I was sitting there and I was thinking that, I should have a 16-year-old child right now. And that's when my heart broke again. God gave me the grace to realize what I had done, that I had in fact murdered my own child. And it broke my heart again. But this time it was broken so that God could replace it with a heart of flesh, like he's always promised to do. Because I was full of repentance for it. I cried. I cried and cried, not only because of the loss, but because of the shame of having done nothing to defend my child.
That's beautiful. You're finally able to, as you said, the Lord opened your heart so you could share the grief that was beneath that pain and beneath all the symptoms of your life was that grief and the loss of your child, your role in the child's death. That led you to Rachel's Vineyard, correct, with your wife?
Well, actually, there were a few steps before that, too. After that, I had finally met my third and final, my true wife, Susan. And we moved to Chicago. There was a fire before Christmas, and that got us going back to the church. There was a church just around the corner from us. In fact, there's a church around every corner in Chicago. You can't spit without hitting the next parish. But we started going to Mass there. Now, she was Church of Christ, and there are no Church of Christ churches in Chicago, at least not that we could find. So we went with the Catholic one because I had connections back with it. And at this point, I had fallen away from the faith. I actually was going back to church for a while without any real faith. But finally, I thought, I don't want to live in a world without God, but I'm having real hard time believing in him. So I decided I would just start living as if there were a God. And that's when he started manifesting himself to me. That's when he started touching my heart and guiding me. And when we
have about 5 minutes just to give you a heads up in terms of our
about this discussion. Okay.
Our time today. Yes. Yeah, so.
All right. Well, we moved back from Chicago, came to Dallas, got involved in pro-life activity here. We were doing 40 Days for Life, and during the victory celebration that's held after every 40 Days for Life, I said, it's time for me to talk about this. And I got up and I told the world for the first time that I had an abortion in my past. And a word of advice to any man going to do this: tell your wife first.
Yes.
Before you tell the world, although she completely sympathetic to it.
Good.
In fact, when I finally did go to Rachel's Vineyard, there it is. When I finally did go to Rachel's Vineyard, I didn't think I needed to, because I said, I'm doing pro-life stuff now. I've admitted it, but I'll go to this Rachel's Vineyard so I can learn about it and tell people who need it that they should, whether they should go or not. Well, I went and I needed it. Rachel's Vineyard did wonderful things for me. It may help me humanize my abortion. It was no longer my abortion. It was now my daughter Elizabeth Dolores.
Beautiful.
And Elizabeth, because it's a family name, it was her mother's middle name, and Dolores because it made me sad. But finally, I had a relationship with my abortion,
Beautiful.
with my daughter.
And that led you to, how did that lead you then to, in a few minutes we have left, to Project Joseph and an outreach just for men?
Well, actually, at the CPLC, the Catholic Pro-Life Community here in Dallas, they were planning a Project Joseph. And they asked me if I would be part of it, sort of as, because they wanted me to be on the team, and they also wanted me to go through the course, because it's the first time they'd ever done it. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I don't really need this. I've been through Rachel's Vineyard. I'm good, but I'll go through it and I'll learn about it so I can tell men who might need it about it. Well, that changed the whole ball game for me. It made me realize how much damage had done to me as a man, as a father, and as a spouse, that I had been broken down through all these things. I was supposed to be, as a man, strong, brave, and true. And my abortion had made me weak, frightened, and unsure. And with Project Joseph, we try to lead the men back to strong, brave, and true.
Beautiful. Reg, I'm going to have you back for another episode in the very near future, and we're going to talk more about Project Joseph, your experience on the retreat. I'm going to give you a chance to go through the program in more detail, maybe give some examples of guys who have been through the program. But for just now, if there's anyone who is watching and viewing this and wants to connect with you and wants to learn more about Project Joseph and Rachel's Vineyard, of course, we could tell them about that, but let them know how they could connect with you and with Project Joseph.
Okay. Project Joseph, there are 3 ways to connect with us. The first is to go to projectjosephdallas.org, projectjosephdallas.org, and come to go there, and you can read about what we've got. There are several pages, and we're going to be updating it very soon. And there you can also find the where to email me. You can email me directly at healing@projectjosephdallas.org. And also, you can call me directly. We have a helpline, which is 469-720-2273. Those last 3 letters spell out CARE. So it's 469-720-CARE or 2273. I have that phone by me at all times. If I can't answer immediately, leave a message and I will call back at the first possible chance, because it's important for people to make the connection with someone about this.
Absolutely. It's awesome to see how God has moved in your life from that time where you looked in the mirror and the evil one was telling you to hurt yourself, and the Lord manifested his grace to you and eventually opened your heart to the and it's so beautiful that the child is the vehicle in the salvation of Christ. The child is a vehicle of his grace and mercy and the healing, and now you're involved in this wonderful ministry of Project Joseph. We're going to have you on again, Reg, and we're going to really dive into Project Joseph even further. I'm very excited to do that with you. I want to thank you, brother, for being with us today, sharing your story, having the courage to do that. What a blessing for us and for all those viewing this program.
Well, the way I see it is now I've lost all my shame about it, because I have confessed, I have been forgiven. The Lord has blessed me because I turned away from it. I've put on the new man that St. Paul tells us about, and put to death the old man who would do abortions and who would be cowardly about this. God has surprised me throughout my life. I never thought that I would be doing what I'm doing today until 7 years ago when I started doing it. And now it's the most single important thing in my life besides my marriage to Susan.
Beautiful. Thank you, Reg. That's awesome. Take care. Well, friends, make sure that you share this program with others. If you're not watching, you might be watching it live, but you also might have an opportunity to share the links that will be available. Someone you know is hurting after abortion, please pass the word on. And you can go to rachelsvineyard.org, of course, if you want to learn more about Rachel's Vineyard Ministries and the retreat that Reg mentioned he went on with his wife. That's one of the beautiful things about Rachel's Vineyard. You can go on with your spouse, whether they were the partner during the abortion or not. They're welcome to attend with you. God bless you, friends.